Everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to another Political Science Student Association meeting. I know it's in the midst of the end of midterms and the end of the semester is coming up, so really do appreciate you guys for making an effort to be out here for the little hour that it takes. I know you could be other places, so we do appreciate your presence. Today our topic is going to be on prohibition, and I know that seems like a very broad topic, but we labeled it as prohibition yesterday and tomorrow. So I do have a few handouts for you guys that'll have like basic information on the historical trend of prohibition in the United States of America. And I didn't notify Dr. Cavalli because I didn't get a confirmation until last night, pretty late. But we do have a special guest. He'll be showing up a little late today. It's the owner of Blue 42 who's going to be coming to speak to us on behalf of the new coffee shop that's down the street that I heard. I'm not from the area, but I heard it's pretty popular right now, to say the least. You want to hand it on? So I'll let Dr. Cavalli take it from here. I know today's going to be a little bit of a weird day. Kind of a smaller crowd, so we do ask if you want to speak, please just raise your hand and we'll turn the camera towards you and the show will be yours.
Okay, for those of you who are not familiar with what we're doing here, we do this every week, every Wednesday at noon. You are welcome to show up at any time that we do these. I will be passing around an attendance sheet. And again, whether you realize you were going to be here for this or not, if you sign the attendance sheet, that will document your attendance. And if you put a faculty name next to your name, I will contact that faculty member, and this will document your attendance at this. Can't guarantee that you'll get any extra credit for it, but I will let them know. If you can bug them for extra credit, I will document your attendance, and we will be live streaming over our YouTube channel as well. So with that in mind, why don't we get going?
Okay, so you can introduce yourself if you'd like to.
Sure, my name's Henry Ostaszewski. I'm an entrepreneur here in the great county of Lumpkin, Dahlonega, and I have a marketplace adjacent to the new business school called Blue 42 Market.
All right, does anybody want to start us off?
Well, I just want to, this is not directly related, but I want to say as somebody who's been here for many, many decades, I'm glad you guys are making use of that building, because when I first got here, it was abandoned with a collapsed roof.
Correct. Yeah.
And there had been some other things in there from time to time, but it just seemed to be itinerant businesses that came and went, and so hopefully you guys will stick around for a while.
It was a depressed property, but one cool thing about it, it begun as an agricultural building, as a chicken hatchery.
Yeah,
so,
I remember there was some name, yeah.
So it was Owens family farm.
Okay, that's it, yeah.
And it was pretty much the prelude to what has become one of the best, I would think, commodities in Georgia, being chicken. So they focused on eggs production, and then in the 70s, the FDA and CDC came out and said eggs were high cholesterol producing, falsely claiming that eggs were highly causing high cholesterol. So that kind of hurt the market. But again, just catapulted Dahlonega into the agriculture community by the Owens family starting that farm.
Yeah, I didn't know this either until I did my internship, but the agricultural industry is the largest one in the state of Georgia. It provides over 40-something% of our economy in our state, and then the poultry industry alone accounts for about 2/3 of that. So we make our money off of chickens here, and I think it's funny because right now a big talk is about tariffs, and so I did a little research on tariffs, and I know there was a chicken tariff back in the day against Germany, so we stopped buying a couple of their Volkswagens to try to pressure them into buying more and more of our chicken and our egg products because we were producing so much over here. But yeah, that's just a little fact that I didn't even know about the United States until about a week ago.
Yeah, chicken tax, right?
Yeah, the chicken tax.
Yeah, what's unique about what we're doing is we turned it back into its agricultural roots. Everyone knows here that's been in our place. We celebrate the cannabis, the hemp plant, and in doing so, that plant is prohibited for over 70 years because of political reasons. If you guys have done the research on hemp, DuPont created petroleum-based plastics and didn't want any competition to those plastics. Most of our fiber back in those days was made from plant-based fibers, not just hemp, but cotton and other fibers, jute. So there's even a push at PSA during World War II to get farmers to start growing hemp again because of the embargoes that we had in Southeast Asia. We weren't getting that fiber in. So it's always been a political hot potato, still is today. That's kind of why I'm here to kind of talk about that. But there's such a sustainable component, even now mitigating some of the hurricane disaster that we had in South Georgia with cotton, timber, and all the other industries that were affected by it. Pecan's a little bit different, but we have a plant that can go in and help mitigate some of those risks for fiber, for food, and others with hemp seed, and also for paper products. So, not to get off target, but this kind of, so I'm very happy that we've taken, and it's not easy doing what we're doing in a place like Dahlonega. We're not doing anything illegal, but yet there's a lot of people that still hold on to it. If you notice, there's a lot of churches in Dahlonega, and I'm a Christian, so I profess that. But the plant has its stigma around it, the devil's lettuce and things like that, that I've had to overcome, and slowly we're becoming that educational place to do that. If you've been by our place, you see we have hemp growing. It's not going to jump out and bite you. It does have a unique smell to it, but there's a lot of medicinal values in it too, and medical values. And I think the political pressure from Big Pharma and other agencies puts the pressure on local politicians and state politicians to create the rules and regulations that they create because they just don't know.
I was raised in Colorado for a little bit of my upbringing, and it was really crazy to see how stigmatized it is now that I've moved to Florida, and now I'm going to school here in Georgia in the South. It's really interesting how it's treated completely differently. But I guess to point out the obvious, our criminal justice system is, and has been for a very long time, so overwhelmed. And I think the common, maybe not common consensus, but a lot of people do believe that, hey, maybe we shouldn't have people in there just for lighting up a joint on a Saturday in their backyard, and we should have more people that really maybe deserve to be in there a little more. Just maybe using our resources in a different way, which is kind of covered in this organ harms of criminalization. But I guess I'm referring more specifically to marijuana because I would view that a little differently compared to what I'd consider harder street drugs maybe. Yeah,
the biggest threat to youth, and I've experienced this unfortunately, is the fentanyl crisis we have. Over 70,000 people died last year in fentanyl. You're not getting that laced in cannabis, especially locally grown cannabis or statewide cannabis. You're getting that in the pharmaceutical type drugs, where you're getting the cocaine and the other Molly and things that people take that get laced with that. I lost a good friend of mine's son from Michigan, shot putter, one time. It's non-discriminate, you take it, it's done. Cannabis, there's a big fear on cannabis and even disparity in the state of Georgia. For instance, 11 of the largest counties in Georgia have decriminalized cannabis. I mean, if you have under an ounce, it's a misdemeanor. It's a $50 or $70 parking ticket. However, if you get caught with cannabis in Lumpkin County, you're going to jail and spending close to $10,000 in attorney's fees and fines. So this disparity with literally 30 miles from a county line to a county line, that needs to be mitigated. There's no reason why somebody should go into jail here in Atlanta or in Athens at University of Georgia, they get a parking ticket. So those are the things that I take personal, and also the new regulations and laws that they put in. I've been to Colorado. I was growing in Colorado. That's where I got my roots. Maybe I should back up a little bit and tell you how I got into this. I played football all the way from the time I was 7 all the way to professional football. I played at Florida State University and then played at Pittsburgh Steelers. The spoils of playing college and pro football are, back in those days and even today, you take a toll on your body. So when CBD came to the forefront, there's a disease called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And that disease has unfortunately affected a lot of my teammates. Teammates affected them whether they committed suicide or died from a brain-related tumor or injury, ALS or an aggressive brain tumor. So CBD showed a propensity to slow down CTE. Now they don't have any precursors to say that you have it. I'm doing studies with the Concussion Legacy Foundation out of Boston to find those precursors, because I still think, when we look at anything, what is the waste of college football? Today we can clearly see it, it's become monetized. But what are the waste of the players? They don't take care of the players when they graduate. So CBD has shown me an entry level drug that I call it a drug. All these things that we put in our body, caffeine, tobacco, all of them are considered drugs. I have 2 degrees from college, criminal justice degree, and I have an interior design degree. I chose the interior design path in my career, but learned taking drugs, alcohol, and crime really introduced me to all those drugs and how to look at them. Either addictive properties, both physical and psychological. So I have a deep dive into this, and CBD has, like I said, got me into the industry. It's a legal proponent of hemp. And I'm just trying to carry even on further. Most of our customers that we get in our marketplace are baby boomers. These are people that probably maybe dabbled with cannabis in the 60s and 70s, but now they're using it as alternatives to the drugs and prescription drugs. All their narcotic drugs are taken for pain, or those they're taken for anxiety, or even sleep, now can be supplemented with a safe alternative natural element that we can grow, pretty naturally here, and control that organically, so we know the source, we know what people are putting in their bodies. That's why I got in the cannabis industry, because I want to make sure I knew what that source was. Unfortunately, in Georgia, our legislators have let our retail industry pretty much run amok for 5 years, creating the scenarios that they can now say, this is what we don't want in our state. Well, I would say unregulated tobacco or alcohol, and see how well that does in your communities. So an unregulated drug like cannabis, whether it's THCA, Delta 8, Delta 10, any of those components of the cannabis plant, the cannabinoids, they have to be regulated. And I would go, and this is the political part, and that's why thank you for inviting me. I went every year for the last 5 years as a hemp grower to the Gold Dome and said, guys, we need, men and women, we need regulations with this substance in our communities. I went to the sheriffs of our town, I went to the sheriff here, I went to the sheriff coming, and said, this is, you can't have this unregulated. No age restriction, no restrictions on testing any of the product. So for 5 years, they let it run amok, and they've created, the legislators, all the scenarios that they can back up and say, this is what we don't want in our communities. Well, that's not just, that's, and the problem that we have as an industry, hemp farmers, I work with probably about 30 or 40 farmers that we cultivate and grow hemp for. A large portion of that is black farmers through AgriUnity. They just get pushed aside. The reason being, in politics, we don't have the money to go in and influence the legislators and help with their campaigns, or show them a path to how they can make money personally. So there's a lot of crony capitalisms that erodes legislator here, not just in the county and state, but also nationally. But what we can do, and what you guys can do as poli-science majors, is start at the grassroots level. I think that's where it begins. That's what I'm doing locally, having a voice. I'm not doing anything illegal, and then pushing those people that have pushback on them because they don't know. They're not educated on it. So that's my job as this place, is our market, is to educate not only students, but locals and politicians to say that there is a path for this, controlled substance in our communities.
I actually had a question for you, because in doing research with this little handout, we learned a lot about the temperance movement in school.
Yep.
And how like the entire purpose of the 18th Amendment being ratified in the first place was to protect our communities and create some sort of moral value system. But then we saw a lot of black market stuff going on. The United States started to lose money, and we were also getting, a lot of people were still drinking anyway. It became deregulated in a sense. But I couldn't really find anything similar that led up to the war on drugs per se, which created the scheduling system and conflated like cannabis with other drugs like cocaine, morphine, and heroin. And so, because you two are older than us, like how did or wiser than us, sorry.
Older is fine, that's a fair statement.
How did this conflation of like marijuana and cannabis happen? And like I'm like being a Hispanic person, like the term marijuana has been used to like kind of,
It's derogatory.
yeah,
Absolutely.
kind of like shine a bad light on my community.
Mhm.
And so how did these two things get conflated with one another? Because I understand cannabis can be used to not only like make paper, for example, but it can be used to strengthen concrete. It can be used in a lot of other industries besides just drugs.
Yeah, Henry Ford, yeah, so that's a great question. And my research has showed me, I kind of alluded to this early on, whenever you get in the Industrial Revolution, Henry Ford built a hemp plastic car. Hemp fiber is stronger actually than steel. It's just proven its tensile strength and strength. So there's that hemp fiber car. But what happened was we had an error, and this is where it gets into minorities and gets into it. We had a really great time in our country where we had good music. We had, the great Satchmo, that came on board, and a lot of the African American musicians during that flapper era, the 20s, were actually using cannabis. Louis Armstrong used cannabis, and he produced beautiful music. But what that did, cannabis, if anybody used it, for me it heightens your senses. You know, for me, you have to be careful with it. It's a drug that can be overdone. You know your dose is kind of our mantra. But it just heightens your senses and music and ability to, what I say, block everything, like you guys are students, to block all those things away that are constantly at you as far as thought, tests, or your test scores and all this. It allows you to be creative. So what happened was back then, when we talk about racism and things like that, the political powers didn't want the white and blacks mixing and merging together, and there's history on this and there's documentary on this. So they created what's called reefer madness. Like, you know, they associated with the devil and devil's lettuce. They did PSAs, they did posters, and they said that you're going to go to hell. You're going to, you know, all these things that, and this really kind of came in. And what that allowed was them to take cannabis, the psychoactive THC product, that allowed them to also lump in hemp, which was a commodity sold. I mean, we have actually a hemp town, Georgia, in Georgia. Hemp town's not called Hemp Town, Georgia because they were growing corn, they were growing hemp, you know, at the turn of the century here. All of, if you go back further in your history, all of, as we started founding the original 13 colonies, they all were charged with growing hemp on their property because hemp was how they would produce the fiber. This is hemp, I'm wearing hemp right here. Pants are up, the shirt is. So there was a charge. Then what happened was DuPont, Rockefellers, came in and they introduced the petroleum-based products that we see now, all through our pharmaceuticals, through our plastic industry, our plastic bottles. And what that did is they said, hey, and even the newspapers that were making hemp paper, they went in and it happens today. It's called generational wealth. They protect their generational wealth. At this time they were growing it. So what they did is they basically said they lumped in hemp as a commodity in with the reefer madness and basically banned it for 70 years. So we had zero hemp production in the state and the United States at all. And it was just based on politics and basically crony capitalism saying we don't want this fiber to compete with our newly produced petroleum-based products. Like back then it was nylon. So that's how it works. And even today we see it where Big Pharma comes in and Big Pharma is scared to death of cannabis and what it can do. So the FDA rules on it. We get local rulings in our state that we just receive where you can't sell flower-based product. You know, and the irony, or it's not even irony, the injustice is the beverage industry has much more power than us hemp farmers. So I can sell a 50 milligram right now THC drink at our market, which I product test everything, which puts my 300-pound butt in a chair for 3 hours, but I can't sell you 0.3% regulated flour. So it just shows you how much politics gets into what we're doing and how much it's influenced by money. And the beverage industry and other industries that have the money to go in the lobby are legislators to carve out their section of the bill. So that's what I'm here to break down and expose, because it's wrong, you know. So yeah, so do a lot of research on cannabis, and I'm not the only one fighting this. They've been fighting this, hippies been fighting this since the 60s. You know, so it's not anything we're fighting, but I'm more in it. I mean, we have a great opportunity with an industrial product and to create economic development in an agriculture state with hemp. There's no reason why Georgia Pacific needs to be going to Canada and buying hemp from Canada to make their sustainable paper products. I can't keep our hemp milk in stock. Why aren't we growing that hemp seed here in Georgia and creating a hemp milk factory that we can support local economies and support local businesses, you know, and creating those avenues to do that? The answer is because it's all controlled by legislator and lobbyists. And we need to get past those stigmas on the plant, which we're doing, and that's what I'm doing here, is educating people on it. So my argument is, if you can justify selling alcohol in every single restaurant here in town, which has zero medical benefits other than maybe sterilization equipment, but when you put in your body, it has zero medical benefit. Whereas you put cannabis in your body, there is proven medical benefits of cannabis.
If you ever get the chance, I'm sure you could probably look it up on YouTube. Look for a movie from 88 years ago called Reefer Madness.
Yep.
Right? It was basically, I don't know how long it is, 60 minutes or 90 minutes, 60 or 90 minute long PSA, public service announcement, so to speak, anti-drug. And by today's standards, it's really silly. I'm sure you've seen it.
I don't know if I've seen that one. I have seen the PSA put out by the War Department called Hemp for Victory.
Oh, okay.
So look up, it's about another one, Hemp for Victory.
No, you should watch Reefer Madness because it is again, today you would look at it and think it's just goofy.
Yeah.
It's silly, but it talks about how use of marijuana will drive people insane.
Yeah.
They'll do crazy things and it just winds up with, dangerous, crazy stuff.
Right.
So if you get a chance, watch Reefer Madness. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube or you can find it easily enough online. There's certainly snippets of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you about the political aspect of weed, I guess, marijuana. It started, I'm a history major, so I know, and I'm mainly focusing on U.S. history. And we didn't really see, like, the regulation, the sort of stigma against weed until the 30s. It wasn't outlawed until the 30s by, I forget what his name was, but by a certain temperance leader. But it was due to a racist origin. It was because a lot of Mexicans in the U.S. used weed because that was part of just,
Their culture.
Culture, yeah. And they didn't. This old white guy didn't like that, and so he lobbied the government to make it illegal. So it's founded on a racist foundation and institution. And I think the reason why, you mentioned Colorado, sort of having a less sort of stigmatized view of marijuana. Well, in the Deep South, we're have a large history of segregation and racism, especially with with African Americans in urban centers, like Atlanta, where marijuana use is just more common. So there's definitely a really big issue in that department. It's definitely it's deeply rooted in Georgia and the Deep South in general. It is kind of interesting looking at the history of temperance because it started out in the 18th and 19th in the 19th and 20th century as a good movement. It was founded on good ideals. It was mainly formed because women did not want their husbands to come home spending their paycheck on alcohol and and getting into domestic violence situations. So that was the cause, but of course things change. It gets taken over by other interest groups, and its values change. But yeah, I mean, with the temperance movement and how sort of it affects weed or alcohol, it's changed a lot. I know that in Georgia we have blue laws. I think it's about by county basis. So
Blue laws are laws that require businesses to close on Sundays.
yeah. So I know that it was just recently decided. I think maybe a year ago or two. Alcohol is not able to be sold on Sundays after 11 a.m. Right? 12 a.m.
It can be sold
They
after.
sold after 12:30, but then there's a brunch execute. So if you're
Yeah.
in like a brunch place, they can sell after 11.
Yeah. So, yeah. But I mean, that's a holdover from a law that's decades old that formed during the 1930s during the temperance movement. So, yeah, it's a serious issue that.
You can go for it. Yeah, that's fine.
I was just gonna kind of go off of that. Like, there's still definitely like a strict like ruling on some of that stuff. Even with like alcohol here, I work at one of the wine tasting rooms, and sometimes there's a guy outside, and he will time you to make sure you don't pour before 12:30 on Sunday. Like, there's literally a guy that goes around to different places, and they make sure you do not pour. So we don't even open our doors.
Yeah, Dahlonega is a little aggressive in their, and again, you have to understand, these are not laws. These are all local ordinances. So they're not laws that are governed under our Constitution. These are regulations that are city and county wide. As voters, we have the right to challenge those. The problem that we have is we have unelected officials making the rules here in Dahlonega, which, you know, whenever I go to a new place, I want to understand the geopolitical climate of a town. My first introduction to that here in Dahlonega is when I painted my logo on the building, or wanted to paint my logo. I get a permit to do that, and then, you know, midday I get a call from one of the officials saying that we need to rescind your permit to do that. And I said, well, why is that? And I've also been able to build a lot of, I guess, allegiances with, and as my mentors here in town, to kind of get guidance from those people that have been here. And whenever you go to a new town, I would urge you to find who those mentors are on campus, if there's a campus in your town, because it's important as a business owner that I include myself in situations like this and opportunities like this, because I want to hear what you are saying, and you are the ones that are going to be going out and becoming the new leaders in our communities. You know, I challenge Dahlonega and everyone in our community when there's this divide between, and there's grants out there right now that I'm going for, divide between the university, the business owners, the tourism. I mean, there's so many divisions here in this town that are all built on hierarchies through all our Rotary clubs and our Chamber of Commerce. I'm doing everything unconventional because I think those institutions have created the environments that we need to challenge. So when you subscribe to one of those, you quickly get put into a lane. I don't want to be put into any lane. I want to challenge a lot of things that are happening. I would just ask this to everyone in this room, is what we're doing working on a national, state, local, state, national level? Whatever we're doing, is it working? The state of our world, is it working? We're at wars all over the place. We're fighting the wrong fights in situations like this whole thing with cannabis. On a grand scheme of things, it's minuscule to what's happening on a grand scale of everything we're doing. But as me, I can't control that. I have no input on that, but I can do it at a local level and something that I believe in. And that's what I'm doing. So my challenge to you guys, as you get out into the real world, find who your confidants are in your community that believe in your ideas. You know, find out what you like to do, and once you find that out, embrace it. And then, you know, I'm an old lineman. I don't let somebody stand in front of me that just doesn't like something because it's how they feel about something. You know, great, I'm sorry you feel that way, but, you know, I have laws and a constitution that protects me. So that's what I challenge you guys to do. So yes, make sure, you know, that you don't, and I fought, but that cost me to get, you know, the reason they told me I couldn't put my logo on the wall was that word cannabis. They said it was against community standards. I said, well, you need to define those community standards. I need to see them in writing. I need to see the regulations and laws that you have on code that tells me that I can't do that. Because there's a First Amendment, and that First Amendment says, as long as you're not breaking the law, like I can't yell fire, obviously, in a auditorium or theater, but there's nothing wrong about cannabis. It is the genius of the plant. So I had to fight that. It cost me $5,000 in attorney fees to do that. As a small business owner, that's a lot of money, but it was important to me that I had that on the wall, because I'm not a CBD store. I'm not selling CBD. That's one cannabinoid out of hundreds that's in the plant. So make sure you just stand up for what you believe in and challenge your local governments and even here, your authority.
I know that was
Go ahead. Go ahead quickly.
difficult, especially with Dahlonega. I grew up here, and I know that there's like a lot of like standards that were just like set precedent here, especially with like signage and stuff. Like my church at one point was grandfathered into the sign rule, and so we didn't have to change our sign, but we changed the name and we were 1 inch too high, so we had to redo a whole sign with the sizing and just things like that. And I know that it's changed a lot, especially within the past like, I want to say like 5-ish years here in Dahlonega. But I remember like the main people that were controlling the town were Miss Green, the college, and the Methodists. Like that was like, it was split evenly 3 ways.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, but you should expect that in a local community. But yet, again, even as a new business owner, as we grow, Dahlonega is one of the fastest, Lumpkin County, one of the fastest growing counties in Georgia. People want to move here because it is beautiful. But how are we going to sustainably grow our community? How are we going to bring commerce here? How are we going to bring housing here? And do it in a way that at least impacts our environment. We have Appalachia. That is a cherished place. And I want to go back even further. We celebrate in this town Gold Rush. Well, we can look at Gold Rush in a completely different picture. Gold Rush, to me, if you know your history, was a genocide of indigenous people. Cherokees lived here. I studied fortunately, I studied the Trail of Tears when I was in college in my religion course. So I read the book on Trail of Tears, and it's horrific what we did as new frontiersmen people in this community to the indigenous people. So I want to make sure we go back behind, because what Gold Rush was and the era was, it was a shoot 'em up cowboy, first cowboy town in America that had brothels, drinking, gambling. It wasn't a good era in our time, but yet we celebrated or found a way to celebrate it. But yet we're not celebrating the indigenous people here that lived with nature. You know, we came in, and I use the word raped nature. We started doing, basically, stripping down mountains for gold. So.
I want to follow up on a couple of things. I'll do it very quickly because you guys have been waiting for a while. I think there were two things I wanted to follow up on. One, dealing with public opinion, but the other dealing with the First Amendment. Something that if anybody's taken my classes, you know, if you took my American government class, you know we teach about the First Amendment, and we teach about something known as content neutrality, which is to say, if it's legal to use a word in one place, then it's legal to use that word in other places. So you are on pretty firm ground. If an encyclopedia or in a dictionary can print that word without getting in trouble with the state or the local community, then you should be able, I mean, as long as you're meeting sign requirements for size, et cetera, that's a different story. But the word itself cannot be prohibited if it is legal to use it in other places,
Right.
because of that notion of content neutrality. The other thing I wanted to mention that I thought was interesting, building on something that you mentioned, was this issue is one of two issues that I have seen in my time here where public opinion has shifted. And in my view, there's a certain tipping point that happens with public opinion. So when I first came here, the two issues that I've seen change are marijuana use and same-sex marriage. Okay, and there are still a lot of opponents to both, but I have seen public opinion shift over the years. When I first came here in the mid-1990s, there's no way you would have been able to do what you're doing now.
Absolutely.
Absolutely not.
No.
Okay, and of course, the state of Georgia and the southern states and virtually most or all states around the United States were not allowing same-sex marriages either. Not until the late 90s, early 2000s, but we began to see a sort of slow change as we got into the 2000s, for example, with same-sex marriage. You started to see a handful of states change their laws, and then in about 10, 15 years ago, actually technically it was about 10 years ago, you saw this tipping point occur. You saw more states start to allow same-sex marriage. You saw the Supreme Court rule that it is a constitutional issue now where every state has to allow it. And while we haven't quite gotten there yet with marijuana laws or cannabis laws, I think we are seeing that in many areas around the country. Because again, in states all around the country 30 years ago, you would not have seen, you would have seen, if anything, people, you know, the public service announcements that I mentioned before, you know, this is your brain, this is your brain on drugs, right?
Egg in the pan, yeah.
You remember that, right? But you don't see those anymore. It's just not worth it to people. And the laws have not quite caught up yet, but we're
Well, it was
kind of
misinterpreted.
in
It was misinterpreted.
Yeah.
It was propaganda.
that- Yeah. Well, you know, yeah, and you know, Nancy Reagan, just say no, right? As
I
if-
did the Say No to Drug campaign.
As if that's all you need to do, right?
Yeah, as an athlete, I would go around and say no to drugs. Then I turn around, go to our local watering hole like you have. I go to the
Yeah.
first, and I get wasted drinking beer.
Exactly.
I mean, so I'm just like, I'm telling these kids not to do drugs, but yet I'm, as an athlete, going and drinking alcohol, which was accepted, culturally accepted.
See, I still remember the DARE pencils, and it was like, don't do drugs, and then when
Yeah.
you shaved it down, it did into saying do drugs.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's still a legacy. You see that on local police cars, the big DARE, right?
Yep,
Okay.
yeah.
You guys have been waiting for a long
So
time.
go ahead, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, because like you mentioned earlier about tobacco is also one thing, and how that industry is just kind of not as regulated. And I have personal experience with that because my dad was a smoker for his entire life.
Yeah.
Like, he from like 6 years old. And anytime I learn about tobacco, it's like, why is this still allowed? I've seen zero health benefits other than maybe calming anxiety a little, maybe. And that's
Yeah,
just
those
like
are the questions we
anecdotal.
need to ask, and as our FDA and our regulatory bodies truly care about us as human beings, because there's over 100, like one of my big fights here in Appalachia, as I mentioned, we need to preserve Appalachia and the Appalachian Mountains, because it is going to be one of the most fertile places, it is one of the most fertile places in North America, because all you gotta do is turn on the TV and you see the western states, the water shortages in California, the fires that are going on everywhere else. Appalachia the next 20 years is gonna be where our breadbasket is, not Northern California or California. So we're moving that. So what do we do to protect it? For instance, economic growth here, the wine industry, you serve wine. Well, as a hemp grower, I am charged with growing my hemp federally, organically, meaning I can only put organic inputs into our hemp, which I agree with. I don't disagree with that. But that means we have less yield. It costs more money for organic inputs, for pesticides when we do our IPA, Integrated Pest Management, IPM. And I had to learn, what was going to affect these plants that we cultivate in Colorado, now here in Georgia. What strains, they come to Georgia. I remember my son-in-law getting off the plane from South Africa in the Atlanta airport, and he didn't know what humidity was. He walked off the plane, he's like, what is this? So the same thing, we brought our plants to Georgia, and it's like, what the heck is this humidity? What does humidity do? It creates moisture, it creates mold, and other things to get into the plant. Same thing the wine industry has to combat with. But the wine industry is able to use pesticides and heavy metals and things like that, fumigation and variegation, that we're not allowed to use to grow their industry. But I'm a fly fisherman. I'm good friends with Daniel Bowman, who's opened a fly shop here. What is that doing to our environment? The runoff into our streams and tributaries, into our rivers. What is that? So how do we mitigate that? That's what I'm going to probably end up running for commissioner and maybe mayor, because I want to make sure that charge, that we build a relationship with the university, we take the components of the university, the scientists that are here, and we go out and we start building that ecosystem where we can grow sustainably. That's what I think is important as we grow as humans. We got over 100 chemicals in our foods that are banned all over the rest of the world, but they're in our food still. We got Philip Morris going in and buying our food companies. And what do? They put high fructose corn syrup in everything we eat because it gets us addicted. They knew what nicotine did in the tobacco industry.
That's what I was going to mention about nicotine. Is like, why is it that we're so against addictive drugs and yet we allow nicotine to be in vapes and cigarettes?
I'm 300 pounds, right? So my fault is the society. Me as an entrepreneur, running by Chick-fil-A, there's places to grab those quick foods and not eating healthy. I'm on that path to do that because, planting a seed in the ground that I started has really connected me to nature and the plant and how we need to live as an agrarian race. That's what we are, humans. Everything we put in our mouth is our output. All they want to do is put poisons in us. So this basically creates all of the modalities that we have, whether it's high blood pressure, hypertension, diabetes, all these. So then drug companies will just feed you a bunch of drugs. So it's this loop we need to break, and it's local, and we can do that locally. I want to provide nothing but healthy food through our market. Not to say that our pastries and things like that or sweets are not, on that level, but using the milks that we get from our local creamery, Mountain Fresh Creamery, the honey we get, all the other fruits and vegetables we get from the Uhula Valley into our store. That's what's important. What's our grocery store until today? Walmart. Walmart's just coming into our town and extracting money. I want to build an economy that the money stays in our communities.
Just a quick answer to your question from a government standpoint. The reason that tobacco is still around is that it predated the federal regulations on these kinds of things. And that's pretty much it. There are a lot of people who have argued that if tobacco were up before the Food and Drug Administration today, that it would never get approved under modern standards, but it just simply existed long before these things ever came about.
Right.
Yeah. Just one more thing that was just like on the thing about like pushing all the poison into your body. Like my dad, he may not have been a drinker, like of alcohol, but he like drank a bunch of soda. He was not a healthy person, and then just he smoked every day, multiple times, and eventually, 2017, he died of a heart attack.
Yeah,
So,
sorry to hear that.
yeah,
So
he
we are.
couldn't even afford like the drugs that they're trying to peddle because, all that shit.
It's unfortunate, yeah.
Coming up with an idea, or at least a theme for this week's topic, was difficult because I had first been notified that you wanted to come out and speak to the organization, and the first thing that clicked in my head was prohibition. The reason being is that a few years ago I was in a speech and debate class, and I actually won first place in the debate arguing that the United States should lower their drinking age to 18. I didn't argue for health benefits, I didn't argue for stigma benefits. What I argued was that the fact there's a binge drinking culture, specifically in young Americans that are in college right now, there's this stigma around alcohol because the age is 21 that we have to drink in secrecy, and at that age we're primed for rebellion. So we're gonna go out into the woods, we're gonna go out to the watering holes, we're gonna sneak in our backyards and try to smuggle it, ask the guy at the gas station to buy us something. And when I was in high school, that's when they raised the age to buy tobacco and nicotine from 18 to 21 in the state of Georgia. So I wanted to look into the history as to why it raised to 21 in the first place, and I brought this up in our last meeting. There was during the war against drugs, the Reagan administration, specifically Nancy Reagan, was working with Mothers Against Drunk Drivers to fight against blood borders. So basically, if the drinking age in South Carolina, because the states get to choose their drinking ages in the United States of America. So this was a big thing after World War II because we were sending a lot of 18-year-olds. We just created the draft. So a lot of our young adults were already fighting overseas. So you hear the common stigma like, oh, if I can fight for this country, I should be able to have a beer with a burger. And states got to choose their drinking ages. So if the drinking age was 19 in South Carolina, but it was 18 in Georgia, the argument was that kids would drive across the border down to the next closest state, get some alcohol, and drive back home drunk under the influence, and this would increase the rate of traffic accidents. So what the federal government did was instate a National Highway Safety Act, or Interstate Act, which requires the states to raise their drinking age to 21. Otherwise, they will no longer receive federal funding for their interstates. And this isn't just interstate because we talked about infrastructure about 2 weeks ago. This includes a lot more than just our roads. It includes like what's underneath our roads and the lights that are on the roads. And being from Puerto Rico, my dad being born in 1955, yeah, he served in the military, so he got all strict and stuff. But as I get older and older, he tells me more and more stories about his childhood. And he talks about how on the island they used to just grab Coke cans and poke holes in them and then go to the beach and smoke pot, or they would be able to go to the bar at whatsoever age. And so I looked at like what other countries' drinking laws were, and they have like standards for at this point. So at 16 you can drink non-spirits, you can drink your beer and wine, and you're regulated to like drinking certain amounts and with family. And then once you reach that 18-21 threshold, that's when spirits are introduced. So they have an education on alcohol. Here in the United States, I don't only see a lack of education on alcohol, but I see a lack of education on drugs in general. And that's why I brought up the first topic of scheduling all these drugs and conflating them all into one category. And in this handout, you guys can see how there have been attempts to try to target this, but I'm not necessarily sure that we're targeting it in the right way. I really do think this is a social issue, more so than it is a political. Well, I guess politics falls into that category. But my biggest confusion is how are we supposed to regulate if we have states like, for example, Oregon, who have tried decriminalizing a lot of drugs, and now they're having to roll back this state ballot measure, this like mandate from their constitution that allows for this to occur, because there are inherent downfalls that happen when we just legalize everything. So how do you regulate?
Sorry, they don't know. We'll give them a chance to sign.
Because I like the idea that you bring up of grassroots and education. I think that's the first step and the most important step. If we have these DARE programs, then why don't we have the DARE programs teaching us about the real effects of X, Y, and Z? So, like, how do you, as an individual, not only having communications and confidants and reaching out into the state legislatures, but how do you expect this to turn out in 30 years from now?
Yeah, I'm not doing a 30-year master plan. I don't know that I'll be here in 30 years. I'm doing 5, 10, 5-year strat plan, 10-year strat plan. And my goal, my why, is I found something that I enjoy. I found what I like. And not that I like, I found something that helps me as a person. And then, on all the challenges that I'm faced with and liking what I like, and I built what I like. I don't know if you've all been into the marketplace, but that's just out of my head. I just wanted to build something that was inviting. Everyone is welcome, and I can, I've done that. But it takes. What I'll say is, I know you said 30 years. It takes time to make these changes, and that's what whenever you go talk to the legislators, that's what they say. It takes time, but it takes time if you don't have money against it. Like, for instance, they've had laws every year that go up, but they play the political ping pong game where they'll take an idea. So the Senate, you get a Senate bill, it has to go to CrossRoad because we have a Senate and we have a House of Representatives. So they have to pick it up and vote on it. So every year the Senate bill will go up, get stuck in crossover. So it's a political, they act like they're doing something, but they're not. So what, we don't have 30 years, I don't think, if you look at the global effects we're having, if we don't make some drastic changes, I don't think we have 30 years. But at a local level, to your point, I'm going to add one more person to your mix of the Methodist Church and all this. It's Doug Parks. He's an attorney. He's been an attorney here for 30 years, city attorney. He's the one who writes most of the laws. So, I'm going to start, how do you go in? You have to dismantle that. And the way to dismantle some of those ideas you're talking about, or some of those things, to do that, is you have to go in and challenge them. And then put them, like for instance, what I did when they challenged me on my sign, I went to Channel 2 News. I got Channel 2 News to do a report and interview the mayor. So it puts them on the spot. And I'm not doing anything. I want them to be mayor, and I want them to be able to. They have to be challenged. That's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Student body, challenge some of these things. Take, for instance, great example. They created a law that says you cannot paint murals in the town of Georgia, or in the city of Dahlonega. They did that intentionally, focusing in on me. And also, they didn't like the fact that there's a 30-foot tall Mr. Clean put on the new car wash. They didn't like that. I get that, but they targeted me as law. You can see I painted another sign on my wall just a few weeks ago. But what I did when I did that is, because this is how I feel, I called the art department, the dean of the art department, or the director, and we incorporated art, because you guys have in your art department a murals class that teaches artists how to do murals. And the guy who's painting our murals is an artist who's actually making money as an artist. So it shows students how they can go out in society and make money in what they like. So that's the challenges that I want to see. Like, to your point, Germany, drinking.
Yeah.
They start drinking when they're kids. They don't act like it's this big thing. But, however, their driver's licenses cost them about $1,000. If you caught drinking and driving, you lose that privilege. So people respect the fact that they don't drink and drive. So that's how you can mitigate some of the things like that. Create laws that when you do get punished from it, and you do get DUIs are pretty stiff here, but I know people that have 5 DUIs that live in this town politically and get away with it and still drive. So we have to find solutions to what you're saying. And it's basically, my point is calling them out and putting them in the spotlight. And that's the hardest thing. When you put them in the spotlight and you challenge them on these things, otherwise they just sit behind their desk on the Gold Dome or wherever else.
I do want to say one thing for those watching at home and for everybody here. I did reach out to the mayor of Dahlonega to come to today's meeting, but she had a scheduling conflict. I think that would have been really interesting to see you two go at it, but I just want everybody to know that she's not here because she just didn't show up or anything.
To her credit, she has shown up here before. It's
Yeah.
not as if she's avoided us altogether.
Yeah.
I don't know whether she's avoiding us for this particular issue, but she has been willing to come here before and talk about it.
And that's, as a business owner, that's my biggest complaint, is that we have city officials that sit there and they project their feelings, or they've never been in our place to experience it or talk about it or give me a fair opportunity to educate them on it. So that's, in respect of her position, I think it's disrespectful not to come in and see what we're doing ourselves. They should be worried about another cannabis store coming into Dahlonega. They should do their due diligence on who's coming in and doing it, and take my references with Tim Coulong and the University of Georgia, the research we're doing with Tyler Harper, Ag Commissioner, and what I've done to make sure that we're doing it in a positive way. That's what I think city councils need to do and city members need to do. Do their due diligence on those that are doing things that are on the edge of what they have trouble with.
Okay, we got somebody over here. Speak up loudly, and then we'll close this up.
My question is just this very simple question: is the whole war on drugs is, I think, pretty stupid because it didn't really work at all. And if you look at the modern day of how many cities and how many people and how much of the population does drugs now, and if you look at all the highly populated and even the rural areas of America, there are so many people that do narcotics, things like methamphetamine, things like cocaine, things like fentanyl. And my question is like, fentanyl, as an example, is such like a new drug. Like, I don't think I ever heard about like big fentanyl crises like beforehand. Like, I've heard about tobacco crises, I've heard about alcohol crises, I've heard about marijuana stuff, cocaine, like situations where those things have popped up in history. I haven't seen that for fentanyl. How does the war on drugs attack things that are like coming out in the future, or like attack things that we don't even know about yet?
I don't know that we have the answer to that. Yeah, I don't know that we have the answer to that. I think we need to define war. I think war is a wrong word to use. War, because especially when you talk about war on cannabis or war on that, there's been a lot of people put in prison. A lot of prisons were privatized. When I was in school, I took criminal justice. So in the late 1987, 1990, the first privatized prison was in Panama City. So you privatize prisons and then you create inmates. So we have to make sure that when we do create a war or a law, we have to dismantle that and ask those questions you're asking, but at a much deeper level, and go down and follow those rabbit holes and say, why is this politically charged? What's the war on this? I don't know that needs to be a war. It just needs to be an education on whatever's coming into our lexicon as a drug into America, and what that is and how are we going to educate our community on it, or basically abolish it. Some of these drugs should not be available. I understand, fentanyl. You can get it as a drug, prescription drug, when you're for pain. But outside of that, I don't think it could be regulated as a substance, as alcohol, tobacco, or cannabis.
And again, from a public opinion standpoint, I think we're right at that tipping point where maybe we won't have any more of these wars, these attempts at prohibition, at least for marijuana.
I've had DEA agents tell me that the war on drugs, and sitting there flying around and arresting people for marijuana, they say if they would have known what they know now 20 years ago, they wasted their time.
Right.
There's so much more things they could have been spending tax dollars on rather than going after cannabis.
That's
No one
why I
has
said
died
network.
from cannabis, overdosing on cannabis.
Okay, why don't you close this out?
So I think you guys all bring up good points. Language is a very powerful tool, and we have to be careful about how we use it sometimes. Like my father always told me, everything is connected. So I do appreciate Henry
Yes.
for coming out today and speaking to us and letting us ask him a few questions. Here's a pocket constitution for you with a little laptop sticker from the PSSA.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for all attending. If you can't guess, next week's topic will be on the result of the 2024 presidential election and general elections. So I hope to see all your faces again, and hopefully we have a pretty big crowd for that one.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. Whenever we have the opportunity.
I didn't know that you were working with Tyler Harper. So I was in the office of governmental affairs and motor vehicles, and so Chairman